Dan. He told me yesterday about your conversation.
Oh, good.
Well,
yeah,
good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think we'll get started. I want to welcome you all to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name is Jeff DeBelko, and I'm fortunate enough to direct our environmental change and security program here at the center. On behalf of former Congressman Lee Hamilton, our president and director, it's our distinct pleasure to welcome you to the Wilson Center and to the launching here in Washington of Africa Atlas of Our Changing Environment. We're pleased to be once again collaborating with our friends at UNEP, and Ashbindu Singh, who you will hear in the panel today, he and I have been, over many years, been cooking up a variety of formats, not usually this big with this many people and this formal, but it's terrific that all our friends, Elizabeth and company in Washington, that we can work yet again together and co-sponsor this event. The Wilson Center, allow me just to say a word that you are sitting in the formal memorial to Woodrow Wilson. Because he was our only president who had a PhD, Congress decided that instead of building an obelisk on the mall that we could go see as tourists, we'd set up a living memorial where the worlds of research and scholarship would come together with the worlds of policy and practice and learn from one another and improve endeavors in both quarters. And I think the product that we're looking at today, this tremendous volume, does exactly that. It brings the best of research together into a policy and practice world that really allows us to hopefully make progress on some very, very pressing challenges. It is our distinct honor to have Achim Steiner at the Wilson Center for the second time. As you know, he's the executive director of the UN Environment Program based in Nairobi, and it has been terrific to have his leadership of this important organization and certainly his support of so many of the issues that we tackle here at the Wilson Center and that so many of you are working on in very practical ways. Joining Achim Steiner is Dan Riesneider, who, as I think many in this town also certainly know, is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Environment and at the State Department, Bureau of Oceans Environment Science. Dan has been the lead on so many of these critical issues for the United States government, and it's terrific to have his insights here today as well. Annie Dutoit is the Chargé d'Affaires from the South African Embassy. This report, this volume was actually launched for the first time in the world in Johannesburg, and so it's very fitting that it was launched there in Africa, obviously, but it's also terrific that the South African government and he can share the South African government's perspective on why this is an important report and how these challenges are being met by all governments and peoples in the continent of Africa. I should also say there are a number of folks, as you might imagine, there are many, many hands that went into this book. And I'll say, as you can hear that, anyone with a BlackBerry, it would be wonderful if you turn it off so that we don't have to listen to that noise the entire time. And I think I've left mine in my office, so I'm not the one that's guilty party. There are many, many hands and many organizations that have supported this, and it's important for me to recognize them because they, too, could very easily be on this podium and sharing their insights. But Barbara Ryan is here from USGS, Woody Turner from NASA, Carrie Stokes from USAID, and John Townsend from the University of Maryland, who's the chair of the advisory committee working with Ashbindu that's been so critical in providing input. So we hope to hear from them in the discussion as well as we go forward. I'm going to stop and turn the floor over to Achim Steiner just to say that we are broadcasting this event live on the web, and then we'll have the video of today's session archived. So when we do come to Q&A, I ask that you use a microphone that one of my colleagues will bring to you, but also know that it's out there as something you can share with other folks who weren't fortunate enough to come in today. So, Achim, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Shall we do it from here?
Whichever you prefer.
Yes, I think that's probably nicer. Thank you very much, Jeff. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, very nice to see so many of you come for today's launch of this atlas. I first of all want to thank Dan to my left, because this was an idea that he came up with a couple of, not months ago, just a few weeks ago, I think, when he said, why don't we bring this product to a launch here in Washington? And for two reasons, I think we both felt this would be very appropriate. One is that we draw in the work that we did as UNEP, and as you heard Ashbinder Singh being the architect of this atlas, very much on the support of scientists and also institutions here in the United States in trying to bring the latest scientific and visual satellite data right to the front door of a decision maker in Africa. Because this atlas really was produced not for an audience here. It was produced for political leaders, for decision makers, for opinion leaders on the African continent. And that is why it was very appropriate that we launched it at the African Ministers' Conference on the Environment, which is a standing body of Africa's environment ministers. And the presidency currently for the next 2 years is in the hands of South Africa and its Minister of Environment. And at Johannesburg already, the launch of this atlas caused an enormous amount, or led to an enormous amount of interest. And I believe there are 3 reasons for that. First of all, when you can depict a message, unfortunately you may not be able to see this, but here we are pointing to the phenomenon of a lake, Lake Faguibin in Mali, and the image is here on the left-hand side, 26th of December 1978, and on the right-hand side, 30th of October 2006. Just to give those of you who are further away, this was the lake, this is the lake, and that's what's left of it. And there are other examples on the continent. So clearly having, maybe I can put this here, having that kind of visual illustration when we talk about environmental change phenomena on the African continent was, I think, a very powerful way of moving away from the domes of scientific and empirical analysis to communicating it into the policy arena. The second important element of this was that we prepared an atlas that literally touches every country on the continent. So it's not your classic kind of pilot study, pilot example, one out of the 50-odd countries on the continent. It is actually an atlas to Africa's changing environment in the most comprehensive way possible for us under the limitations that we faced. But in each country, clearly there are illustrative examples, and we try to also link the discussion of environmental change to the Millennium Development Goals. So we're not just talking about environmental change as an isolated phenomenon, but what are its implications to development, to people, to the future of the economy, and ultimately to the sustainability of resource use. And the third part of it, which for me as somebody who has lived in Africa a lot, perhaps the most stunning part was then to draw together some of the latest knowledge we have about underlying and overarching trends in terms of environmental change on the continent. And here I just want to draw your attention to a few which I think are very important. We are now talking about well over 900 million people on this continent. So when we always talk about the billion plus China perspective or the billion plus India perspective, we should also realize that here we are talking about a continent where we are close to 1 billion people, of whom, for instance, 300 million already live under conditions of water stress, either seasonally or permanently. That is a third of Africa's population. So when we currently hear the dreams of a green revolution on the African continent, the first thing we must realize that to talk in continent-wide terms on these issues is simply an irrelevant concept today. We have widely divergent realities. Those of you who deal with Africa know this anyway. But there is sometimes a tendency in global policy discourses and debates to aggregate things to the point where the numbers suit a particular message. We have all done it. I have done it. But what is striking when one talks about the future development perspectives of Africa, that there are widely divergent paths and realities that are emerging. For instance, we also found that land degradation is now a major concern for 32 countries on the continent. Forests and the loss of forest cover is a major concern in 35 countries. Africa is losing more than 4 million hectares of forest every year, twice the world's average deforestation rate. And as you know, very often illegal logging, not necessarily capturing the value added, and in addition to that, not being able to reinvest in the actual maintenance and development of forestry. But again, not in every country, but in many of the nations across the continent. We also found, and this is, I think, a particularly troubling figure that erosion and chemical and physical damage have degraded about 65% of the continent's farmlands. This notion that there is this untouched, pristine, arable land simply waiting to be cultivated is naive in simple factual terms, and also a risky way of looking at the dynamic of access to land and the conflicts and tensions that are already emerging on the continent over access to land. We, as UNEP, are headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya. I presume many of you have followed the events after the election earlier this year. This was not unrelated to the question of land. When UNEP published its report on the Sudan and its post-conflict assessment last year and drew the linkages between long-term changes in weather patterns, its potential implications in terms of the impact of climate change, and how land degradation and desertification were pushing communities further and further southwards into each other's terrain, leading to some of the conflicts, not in a deterministic way, but contributing to the potential for conflict and competition and pressure over resources, leading communities essentially into a situation where they are, if they do not have the right governance and mediation fora, government functions that ensure equitable access, you end up with the kinds of conflicts we are seeing not only in Darfur, but in fact in many parts of Africa, sometimes more latent, sometimes more openly. But a great deal will depend on how we deal with the issue of access to land and how people can look to the state increasingly on the continent to mediate these natural resource management decisions that are inevitable for the future development of the economy. But, and this is another important point, this atlas is not just an illustration of environmental change in the negative sense. It has in these pages many an example of how a deliberate policy choice by government leaders, by communities, or by them working together allowed for a very different outcome. And that is one of the heartening things. This atlas is not saying this continent is condemned to a path of environmental degradation, etc., etc. The same story coming out of Africa that we so often hear when the rest of the world talks about Africa. This atlas also tried to give a voice to those who have shown that there are very different pathways that countries are able to take, have taken, and will take, hopefully, in increasing numbers. And whether it is on the climate change front, where African Union summits have already looked at the highest level of leadership, where our collaboration with many countries now is focusing from a UNEP perspective on bringing the best science to national and local decision-making, it is in this interface that I think I see the greatest hope for some dramatic shifts on the continent. And in producing this atlas here, what we are documenting is an increasing commitment by UNEP to bring the best of the world's science to the local level of decision-making. Because in a world of climate change and IPCCs, we've become all but too used to the fact that we can always talk about the world in its totality. But an IPCC scenario on a global level is meaningless to a Minister of Finance, a Minister of Agriculture, or indeed a provincial governor who is trying to ask the question, where am I going to put the meager resources I have now in terms of dealing with climate change? Adaptation is the great unknown, both in terms of an answer on the continent, but also in terms of how on earth we will finance a response to the dramatic escalating impacts of climate change on the continent. So I'll stop here because I'm sure my colleagues have a lot to say as well. I simply would like to say that in UNEP we're extremely proud of this, both in terms of the partnerships that made this possible. It's an immense amount of work, as you will see when you pick up the atlas. And I want to pay tribute to Ashbinder Singh and his team, but also our many colleagues and friends here in the United States and in the scientific community who made this possible, because this is truly a pooled knowledge product. And UNEP is very proud to be able to present this here today in Washington. And I hope you will make use of it and hopefully hold us to ever higher standards as we develop these kinds of products. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Achim.
Yes, excuse Excuse me. Thank you, Jeff, and it's great to be here with Achim and Henny and Ashbindu. And it's great to look out in this audience and see so many people that I know from many different incarnations. So welcome to everyone. Achim Steiner may not be the busiest person on the planet, but he's certainly he's right up there with the busiest people. And so it's especially pleasing to us that he could take time to come to Washington and to be here to take part in this launch of the Atlas for Africa. And it's a very great honor to be up here with him. Unfortunately, Claudia McMurray, our Assistant Secretary for Oceans, Environment, and Science, who is passionate about Africa, is herself in China today, or she would be here herself. So I just make that comment. We are very pleased that the United States can be here and can congratulate Achim Steiner and UNEP, Ashbindu Singh, publicly, and all of the partners involved in the production of the Africa, the Atlas of Our Changing Environment. In our view, the Atlas is a unique product that combines the best of scientific assessment and analysis with really striking graphic imagery that highlights the environmental changes taking place in Africa, as Achim pointed out. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and the impact of the scientific and visual evidence presented in the Atlas is compelling. I would say that this is an area, there's been a lot of discussion in the world recently about international environmental governance and about the comparative advantages of institutions and so forth. We think that the kind of work done here, the kind of work that UNEP is doing with Google Earth, for example, is a place where UNEP has a comparative advantage, a real unique comparative advantage within the UN system. And we encourage this kind of scientific assessment of environmental issues, environmental problems. I think that's a very important contribution that UNEP makes. We hope the Atlas will be successful in drawing the attention of African government officials, policymakers, and the international community to the many serious environmental problems facing the continent today, including the disappearance of glaciers, deforestation, as was mentioned, drying up of lakes, you saw the picture, and the many challenges posed by rapid urbanization. These environmental issues are closely linked to sustainable development and must be addressed as part of the overall development agenda for Africa. In addition to the evidence of environmental changes and degradation over the past 30 years, we're pleased that the Atlas also highlights some areas of environmental improvements that are the result of successful interventions by national governments and local communities. These improvements demonstrate that local actions taken to manage resources and protect the environment can have dramatic positive effects. I think this is especially important because so often the news on the environmental front is negative, and it's important not to lose sight of the actions we can take that make a difference. I'm also pleased to note that the United States government was a major contributor to the development of the Atlas through its ongoing support for space science and Earth observation technologies, including the 36-year legacy of the U.S. Geological Survey's Landsat satellite program. The Atlas serves to demonstrate the power of satellite imagery data in monitoring ecosystems and natural resources and providing science-based evidence to support political decisions. I'd like to specifically acknowledge the contributions of USGS and USAID in contributing agencies, along with the other public, private, and civil society partners. I think I should mention University of Maryland in this regard, in particular, not just because they're very close by, but because they contribute so much. Beyond drawing attention to environmental problems, we hope that UNEP and its partners will build on the momentum generated by the Atlas to further strengthen scientific capacities in Africa. Specifically, there is an urgent need to develop capacities within African governments and institutions to use science-based tools for environmental monitoring and assessment to support decision-making. We would welcome the opportunity to work with UNEP to explore how the data sets generated from the Atlas could be packaged and used to further develop expertise in geospatial analysis and environmental assessment. Once again, just like to congratulate Executive Director Steiner, UNEP, and all of the contributing partners in making the Atlas a great success. The United States looks forward to continuing our productive partnership in this important area. Thank you very much.
Please, any? Yeah,
Okay, followed by.
Thank you. Very kind remarks.
Oh, very pleased you're here.
Yeah, good afternoon. I want to extend my personal thanks to a number of people in this room. One is Jeff, who always helps us to organize these meetings. And John Townsend, as the chairman of the advisory committee, he's always available for advice. Whenever I have doubt, I go to him. Bob Ryan from USGS and Eric, who flew all the way from Sioux Falls to come here, and actually they host the center there. Woody Turner, I saw him here, maybe he's somewhere else, from NASA, who has been very supportive. And also Kerry is here, Kerry Stroke from USAID, Dan Tunstall from WRI, and our old friend Guy Lund. If I send an email to him for getting some write-up, I know within 24 hours Guy will send me something. So he's very dependable. And thanks to all of them. And Tim Foresman, my ex-boss, the idea of Atlas came through him. That's what we did, this One Planet, Many People. Thanks a lot. As you know, I'm sure most of you know that UNEP has this mandate to keep the state of environment under review. We put the light on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. And bring to the attention of the governments, really. That's our one of the mandate we got from the General Assembly. However, UNEP alone is not trying to get the attention of policymakers. So we must need to compete in the crowded marketplace for ideas. So that's one of the challenge for competing there. So the challenge is, how do we get our message across? How do we connect local to global? I mean, the changes, most of environmental changes are taking place at local level. How do we connect to the global audience so something is done? So we did this Atlas 3 years back, and it was a huge success. And what we did in that was, we wanted to answer a very simple question. What is happening where? Then why? Because one of the things we found that it's the trend over time, which is the most compelling information for public. If you tell them air quality is this much, they don't understand. But if you say air quality is going up or down, they try to pay attention. Forests are disappearing or not, then they start paying attention. So, and picture is worth 1,000 words, as Dan said. So we tried to build the story of environmental change using 35 years record of Landsat data. One of the innovation we brought was, we brought the ground photograph, we built this story. So there were a lot of actually activities in that. And those who are in this field know that there are a lot of satellites revolving around the Earth. And we can get data now from 1 meter up to, actually lower than that, up to 1 kilometer, and so there's a lot of data flowing. However, those who have done remote sensing, like me, know that people ask me, what is value added from UNEP? So remote sensing people get the image like this when they go and try to, which normal person will not understand what it is. And it takes us about, actually for an analyst, more than a month sometime to get to this. Actually from there to build a story. So this is an image of Guatemala and Mexico border. You can see the deforestation. Actually you can do the country boundary, you can see it because of deforestation. So what we do is really we process it so it's more understandable. We see where this place is there, where is this place in the Mexico and Guatemala border, location one. Then we bring some ground photographs so people connect with that, and then we write 150-word story. Actually, UNEP should think of patenting it because we spend a lot of time in really getting this technique perfected. In this atlas, the basic question we tried to answer was, what is the status and trend of environment in Africa? What are transboundary issues which need international cooperation between more than 2 countries? What are important environmental issues in each country? What is happening to the Millennium Development Goal 7 related to environmental sustainability? And what are the scientific evidence of local changes taking place? And we also try to get some interesting facts and figures. So it becomes a little bit interesting, not a boring scientific document. So Atlas became a little bit thicker and heavier than when we thought of doing that. Now it's 390 pages. You can see a lot of satellite images, 316. We got the data for almost every country, 106 places, 319 ground photographs, 151 maps. We printed simultaneously both in English and French. And we tried to use all the non-copyrighted material. In fact, even for ground photographs, we spent a lot of time on Yahoo, Flickr, and all that to get the pictures which people can use it free of charge. So chapter 1 is basically a very introduction to Africa, if you call it. And then we tried to put a graphics. This is basically came from guide when he thought of that how the Africa population is growing and how the Africa is becoming smaller and smaller in terms of the population, if you see per capita availability of land. This comes from NASA and USDA. Actually, they monitor the lake level in Lake Victoria, and you can see it's slowly going down. And there's no way of knowing this, it is happening, if we didn't have these technological assets to measure that. This came interesting. Again, it's from NASA. Africa is lightning center of the world. If you see, Africa gets more lightning than any place in the world, which I was surprised, to be frank. And that's no wonder. It comes from University of Maryland that Africa gets a lot of forest fire. I mean, there are other regions as well. So Africa throughout the year, if it's a composite for 2006, I believe, yes. A lot of forest fire, if you see, get it throughout the year. Chapter 2 looks at transboundary issues in terms of ecosystem, in terms of pollution. Everybody thinks of Africa, dust is down from Africa. Whereas this is one of those where if you see this is an effect of forest fire which happened in Greece, how the continent is being affected because of that pollutant coming from the Greece. So it's just blaming everything for Africa is not correct. Africa also gets impacted by others. The chapter 3 is over 300 pages actually. The idea is really where we covered all the countries, all 53 countries in Africa. And we thought of doing almost 6 pages for each country. So we have a country profile, let's say Rwanda. Very simple description about the country, and then we have the graph showing the Millennium Development Goal indicators. The other side, we picked up 3 environmental issues from the literature, really. And then we put some nice photograph and some nice facts and figures, so people really find it interesting to read it. And then we put 2 places where we can see some change. So idea was 6 pages for every country. So for example, this is, if you see one of the places in Rwanda, where you can see the green color, how the deforestation is taking place in Rwanda, and you see the difference between 78 and 2006, how much deforestation has taken place. This lake, which executive director said in Mali, actually we discovered it maybe the first time that brought to the public attention, that this lake has totally disappeared between 78 and 2006. Similarly, actually I lived in Kenya, but I didn't know that Uganda has a glacier mountain. So this is one of the new things we picked up was that Mount Ronjori in Uganda, where the glaciers are melting even there. So just if you look that side. This is example more positive. We are also looking for more positive examples. Not everything is gloom and doom. This is effect of restoration of wetlands in Mauritania. You can see all the dark colors. That's where the wetlands have come back. This one is an example of how the tree cover has increased in some part of Niger. So they will try to get some nice examples. By literature review and looking all the internet and all, we found that these are the major environmental issues in African countries. And what interesting we found was that deforestation, threat to biodiversity still remain the high problem in highest number of countries. I mean, the climate change is the driver to a lot of them, but that's really the big came out of this thing. Some of the findings, I mean, yes, deforestation is a major environmental issue in most of countries, but we did not find any major frontiers of deforestation like you find in Amazonia or in South American countries, really. Africa, there is not a big commercial thing where thousands of hectares goes away in few days. Africa is lightning center of the world. as the executive director said, there are some very successful stories like in Niger, in Mauritania, where things are happening in a positive way. And we found some interesting example in countries like in Botswana, for 14 people, there is one elephant. Basically, it has the highest number of elephants. We didn't want to repeat same thing, so we wanted something interesting, so people pay attention. So there are a lot of elephants in Botswana in that. Atlas is available, na.unep.net. Africa Atlas, actually, it's free of charge. Anybody can download it. All the PowerPoints, all the PDF file, high-resolution file, TIFF files, everything is there. We have also created a blog, first time in UNEP, I believe. We are working with Google Earth right now. Actually, we will release on Google Earth on 15th July. There's some technical problem, but it will be released on Google Earth on 15th July. We are printing CDs and distributing it, mousepad, to get to more and more people. And we are also planning for some capacity building workshops in environmental monitoring and visualization tool. And we got a lot of media coverage since it was released on June 10th, actually. It became a huge success in 2 weeks' time. Every day we are getting requests for more material, either by media, by textbooks, and so we are already getting that. We brought a lot of visiting scientists, actually, from Africa to work on this in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So it's not that everything was done here. We brought a lot of people to work on it, and from the continent, and they contributed to that. Actually, I would say that most of work was done by the visiting scientists and some of the staff we have in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So thank you very much. What we need is how do we bring young and old and put this technology really together, and that's what we need for Africa. Thank you. The other thing we are now planning is really to take all this information now at a country level so we can make some difference in the countries. I mean, that was the whole idea, that because people want to see what is happening in my backyard. Now we have information, so we package it and take to the countries in terms of capacity building and mobilize some action there. So that's really ultimate goal. So it's not just a coffee table book, it has to make some impact. And that's what we are trying to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Sitting up here, I realize why why I'm the political counselor in the embassy, and my much smarter ambassador is the ambassador. He probably took one look at this panel and realized it's going to be a tough act to follow, so he threw Henny du Toit in for the wolves here. But thank you so much. It's on a serious note, the ambassador would have loved to be here. He had to travel circumstances beyond his control, and he has asked me to convey the message. Thanks for allowing us to be here. So as I said, it's an honor for me to speak here today on behalf of Ambassador Velile Nhlapu. Our President Thabo Mbeki launched the African Atlas at the AMSEN meeting in Johannesburg earlier last month. As the current chair of that organization, we therefore take the opportunity to thank the authors and UNEP for the thought and hopefully action-provoking publication. What we particularly appreciate about the African Atlas is the visual pictures that it provides of these challenges. To use the old but true adage, and as Mr. Singh just said, a picture does speak 1,000 words. And these photographs that we just saw highlight the damage that deforestation, loss of biodiversity, degradation, pressure from growing and moving populations, and erosion does to our common environment. When South Africa hosted the World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002, the world recognized that poverty and global inequality were the greatest threats to sustainable development. It is this very challenge that continues to face us today, in the face of even greater threats of climate change and environmental degradation. Indeed, climate change is one of the greatest challenges on the continent. Africa is one of the regions that is least responsible for climate change and is also least able to afford the cost of adaptation. During our time as AMSEN President, we hope to launch a process that will lead to the formation of a comprehensive framework of African climate change programs and an African common position on climate change. We will also work towards strengthening and supporting the implementation of the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation and build a strong base for international environmental governments. We believe that AMCEN, together with other African institutions like the AU, should continue to spearhead efforts to manage and protect Africa's environmental resources. We're happy to say that our goals as AMCEN chair and members of the AU are in line with the findings of the Atlas publication, and that we as Africans, together with our international partners, will continue to strive for solutions to the challenges facing our changing environment. We therefore hope that this atlas will be a rallying cry to Africans and the international community alike, so that no one can say that they did not see with their own eyes the efforts of environmental degradation and the need for urgent action. Let me end by quoting President Mbeki when he said in 1996, "I am an African. I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land. We as Africans are well aware that our pasts, our presents, and futures are linked in our common environment, and as such we are committed to its preservation and sustainable development." Once again, thank you, UNEP, for your crucial role in this very important initiative. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I think I need to send a copy of today's meeting to all our future speakers and suggest to them it is possible to be interesting and substantive and brief at the same time. You are all to be commended for achieving that. It is not always the case from this podium. So I very much appreciate the fact that this was both very interesting presentation, but also fortunately gives us the time to draw on this terrific audience and bring them into the discussion, which I'd like to do now. And as I mentioned before, have my colleagues come to you with a microphone and let us know who you are as you pose your question or your comment. And again, ask that our audience be as tight and concise in their questions as our speakers have kindly been in their presentation. So I think, absolutely. I'm going to put the finger on a couple people right off the bat. In part, John Townsend, for example, his name has been mentioned a number of times from University of Maryland, a contribution. Sonia, if you could bring down and have John kick us off in the conversation.
Well, thank you very much. I am on Ash Bindu's advisory group, which of course means that, like nearly everybody in the audience, I work for Ash Bindu more hours than I like to think at times. He's a very, very persuasive person. I've also been involved with his work through something called the Global Land Cover Facility at the University of Maryland, which supplies free remotely sensed data, thanks to some funding by NASA. And I think one of the things that we have to remember is, and one of the reasons for the success of this atlas and previous atlases, resides in a very boring topic called data policy. But without data policy, we don't get data, we don't get information. And the US has shown world leadership in having a very enlightened data policy which enables the data to be shared by everyone. And the savings to programs such as UNEP are truly enormous. In fact, they just would not be able to carry out the work they do without the ready availability of US data. There is at the moment an organisation which is being set up called GEO, the Group on Earth Observation, and it's trying to coordinate Earth observations throughout the world and to provide much better observations than we currently have. What I would say is that what we want to make sure is that the leadership shown by the US is followed by the rest of the world, and they make their remotely sensed data openly and readily available for everybody. And I would ask you, Executive Director, to use your good offices to persuade other countries to follow the lead of the United States to make sure that everybody can monitor their own world, their own backyard, using remote sensing. Thank you.
Terrific. John, John, would you mind terribly handing that to Barbara right next to you? Barbara Ryan from USGS, who also really, without their support, this project wouldn't be possible.
Thanks, and I'll just take a couple minutes because I would actually like to build on what John said. But first of all, on behalf of our director, Mark Myers, and actually our secretary, Dirk Kempthorne, who led the U.S. delegation to South Africa last November on a program that John just talked about, group on Earth observations. It's not just satellite observations, it's also in situ or ground-based measurements. And I think as Bindu was going through his slides, you not only saw those photographs that showed on the Earth how those individual landscapes looked, right on the ground, but also satellite Earth observations. And I think what John says about data policy is so important. We've got the archive of this imagery, most of the mid-resolution imagery, which is from the Landsat satellites out in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The chief of that data center is here, Eric Clemens, with us. But, whether it's urban growth or agricultural development or any of the landscape change images that we saw, you don't often know where the next change is going to take place, whether it's a tsunami or whether it's agricultural impacts. And so I think it speaks to something that we often don't pay attention to, and that's really the power of archives, so that with our Landsat satellites and this mid-resolution imagery, you are constantly taking a picture of the Earth, not tasking the satellite for one special event, but it's a regular routine collection of those Earth images. And it's just so very important that particularly here in the United States, we continue those observations, and Bruce Quirk is in the audience and under his leadership has been leading an effort with our own Office of Science and Technology policy for what's the next Landsat satellite that needs to go up. So I would like to just end there, and again, maybe thank you and UNEP, Ashbindu and Achim. We would love to invite you and Dan out to our Sioux Falls data facility so that you can see this archive that just needs a little bit more attention. So thank you very much.
Jeff, sure, please. If I could just make a comment here, because both of you have mentioned GEO, the Group on Earth Observations. Just to note that GEO was actually born in a room in the basement of this building. 5 years ago, almost this month, I think it was, that we launched the Group on Earth Observations here in Washington, and I think it's been an incredible success, not only in the area of data policy, where it took us, I think we had a declaration that was one page. It took us 9 hours to negotiate that declaration, but I think the effort involved, because people, the issues of Earth observation were not unique to a single ministry in any country. For each country that was in the room, we had at least 3 people representing different ministries and different points of view. So getting these people together was tough. But it's been done. I think NOAA has shown great leadership, Admiral Lautenbacher, and also South Africa. We work very closely with South Africa on the executive group for GEO, and so it's a smashing success. And I'm embarrassed that I didn't mention it. Thank you for mentioning it. Yeah.
Terrific. Sonia, I think Carrie Stokes from USAID also has a comment, and again, another one of the groups that have been supportive of this project and making it possible.
Sure, it's almost like we've orchestrated this, although I don't know if any of us knew we were going to be getting up to speak before we got here. Again, I'm from the U.S. Agency for International Development. We focus much of our work on capacity building in developing countries around the world, especially Africa. And I work in particular on geospatial information technologies. And in support of GEO, as well as the summit that we held, or that was held in South Africa last November, AID was an active partner, a member promoting capacity building to use Earth observations for improved decision making. So we are one of the many U.S. government agencies that contributes to the GEO process and the capacity building committee activities, as well as the U.S. GEO sort of counter organization that supports the GEO process. And this particular activity that Ashbindu dreamed up and communicated with me about one night was kind of interesting. He was at some point, I don't even remember, Amsterdam, was flying somewhere around the world. I was somewhere else around the world. some crazy hour, and I got an email from him at the end of our fiscal year, and so we're trying to pull together our last-minute procurements, and he had this great idea, and it hit me about 2 o'clock in the morning, I think, where I was, and I responded to him at 2 seconds after I got it, and I said, I think this is a great opportunity to support our objectives here and improving the ability of developing countries to use Earth observations and to be able to see changes. So I was able to work the system somehow at the last minute and get some support to do this, and it really falls in line with the kinds of things that we like to support at AID. And we continue to do this kind of work, and we look forward to continuing to work in partnership with UNEP, who has also supported another effort that we're working on right now, to take these kinds of images that you've seen here, a little snapshot of, and to make it operational. We have a program that looks at data and standards that are being created so we can share that kind of data, and we're making a system in partnership with NASA and with NOAA, many other international efforts that are going on focused in Africa, and we're starting in Nairobi at the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, also known as RCMRD, that has been a mapping center in place for at least 25 years now, and we're working with them to bring these kinds of images, to make them available via internet technologies and distribute them to the public and to decision makers so that they can use them more actively. So anyway, thank you again for your efforts in this, and we are very proud to be one of the partners.
Thank you very much, Gary. Really appreciate it. My colleague right there. Perfect. Well, we'll get some more questions. I should say, we're so subscribed today that we have 2 overflow rooms, so my colleagues have been passing me notes with questions from there. I think what we'll do is we'll collect a number of them and then give you all a chance to respond. 2 from folks watching on closed circuit. One, will the Atlas model be used and created for other regions as well? And so will this be, is kind of Africa the first, and then will there be others as well as, and I think this question's been answered, specific countries, which it sounds like from Ashbindu's comment is in the works. And then also there was some sense of whether either this Atlas or other ones will be able to track some of the environmental phenomena that go between continents and capturing some of that dynamism, whether it's kind of some of the dust storms that are originating in Africa and then have impacts elsewhere. So those are a couple of questions from other parts of the room. Why don't we take some more from here and give our panel a number of them and go from there. So Karen, if you could come down right here in the front.
Hi, I'm Tim Foresman, and I'm proud as can be of Ashbindu and Achim Steiner for the leadership they're showing here. I want to point out that there's a trend, and UNEP was the first contract that Google Earth had when they were 4 young programmers. This technology is shifting, and it's a major shift, that the leadership from the top being established by UNEP in partnerships is critical, but we're now having a groundswell of capacity for individuals, NGOs, citizens to interact directly with the free data and a democratization of data that heretofore we never could imagine. So that when we talk about where are the next things happening, well, you have 900 million witnesses in Africa that can begin doing that. And that's the shift that Paul Hawken in his book, Blessed Unrest, begins to talk about. That they can't do it alone, but the combination is very powerful, and it's what Kofi Annan told us in 2002 in Johannesburg, that we need the Type 2 partnerships of businesses, NGOs, academicians like University of Maryland, and government working together. And for the first time, technology is enabling us to do this. I applaud these gentlemen. They're doing great, and all the other people that are working together. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. Yes, Karen, if we could stay down here in the front.
Yes, my name is Sakutari. I'm at the Global Environment Facility. It's really a great pleasure to be here. Monique is out of town. She asked me to convey her greetings to you. Stepping back now, I was the head of regional office for Africa at UNEP for 6.5 years until September. The one key message that I really wanted to put forward here is that there is a tremendous need for this type of information and data in Africa. While I was at UNEP, I was, of course, UNEP is the secretariat to the AMCEN, which is the African Ministerial Conference on the Environment. And in my daily interactions with these decision makers, they are really confronted with a major challenge. When you are an environment minister in Africa, you are really limited. First of all, I mean, you just don't have enough data and information. And secondly, you are probably the weakest ministry. And anything that can be done to strengthen their hands, to make sure that we translate this data, information into simple policy that can assist them become much more powerful, much more stronger internally, I think we'll all benefit a lot in this. So congratulations, and this work has to continue. And Dan, again, thank you for helping out with this Landsat data set. The difficulty that I saw when I was leaving UNEP is that the data set is available to the countries, but there is no capacity to process it, very limited resources to make sure that they made a very good use of what is sitting there. So again, we can all link up and help each other out to make sure that that data set is processed, that the capacities are developed internally in the region to help in doing so. So again, thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. There was a question right there.
Hi, Audrey Leigh from the Department of Energy. I have a question about whether this tool could be used to, as part of a framework to give countries the ability to reforest for carbon credits, sort of as like a CDM for carbon mitigation, and whether this tool is ready and how exactly it would be used to implement such a framework.
Okay, terrific. So it's a minor agenda item, right, for a number of people on this panel, the climate change and carbon sequestration. Okay, why don't we take that batch and give you all a chance to pick and choose among some of the questions or comments, and then we can come back for a few more. Would anyone like to?
Well, just one point, because Kerry Stokes mentioned the work that AID is doing in GEO on capacity building. And Sakutari's point about we have the information, the point is to use the information to empower people with the education, the training to use that information is so important, and it was recognized early on in GEO, particularly from developing countries, and we've been working, AID in particular has led the effort for the United States side in GEO to try to work on these capacity building issues, because it doesn't do anybody any good if it sits on the shelf.
There are plans for other regions? Ashbindu?
Where's he going?
Well, I have only 2.25 staff, so it's a challenge. Yes, there is a plan to hopefully do Atlas for West Asia and Latin America and Caribbean. So they are already planning. We already have requests from Uganda, Rwanda, and Ethiopia to help them to do Atlas for their own country. An executive director has given us marching order to do Atlas of Kenya within 4 months, which I haven't yet figured out how can we do that. But
yeah, so
there are already plans.
Yeah, Ashbindu is going to be in touch with all of you again, really soon. Yeah.
Yeah, on transboundaries issues, yes. Anything actually, that was one of the things we covered in One Planet, Many People earlier Atlas. Wherever we can find some scientifically credible data and images, we do want to show the transboundary relationship, whether it is dust storm or forest fires or carbon monoxide, whatever really. So yes, that's something, and that's coming more and more actually. A few years back we didn't have satellites to measure those kind of movements now, but now actually you can track the movement of pollutants and all that. So yes, we are trying to cover that as much as possible. Actually, we did also cover in Africa Atlas as well. In terms of carbon trading, yes, some of these tools can be applied. I mean, especially when you want to know the area of forest, where the forests are, exactly how much forest area or how much you are going to reforest, and also avoided carbon, if you keep the forest intact, you can get the credit. So that's also, so it could be excellent tool for measurement, monitoring, and transparency. How do you know people have planted trees and whether they survive after 5 years? But you have to have some ground information. Satellite is not going to give all the things which you need, but it could be one of the tools really to help towards that.
Just a couple of comments. I mean, I think we definitely are looking on the CDM front at how to use. I mean, it's not specific this Atlas now, but if you go to Brazil today, I mean, there's a whole atlas, a whole satellite imagery-based early warning system, just-in-time monitoring system that has been established by the Brazilian government to deal with illegal logging, with monitoring the Amazon. It's a system we're looking at the moment in terms of the South-South cooperation. Is this a relevant system that the Brazilians have developed that could be used in Central Africa, Congo Basin Initiative, for instance, Indonesia, where UNEP produced a rapid assessment of illegal logging 2 years ago, and the government has just asked us to come back again and do another assessment, partly because ministers appreciate the value of an external, independent, authoritative voice to put the facts on the table, which sometimes and this is not unique to developing countries. There are certain things you will not say here in Washington because you still want to be working in Washington in the Beltway tomorrow, right? I mean, I have lived here. Often too prevailing a sentiment, maybe. But imagine if you are in a power structure where you are essentially touching on some, core economic interests. So the power of the United Nations, with its authority, its independence, its scientific credibility of UNEP, putting a report out there and saying that 70% of all logging in Indonesia, I'm not sure if I have the figure totally right now, is illegal, or more than that even, of the logs leaving the country. And this is theft from the country, it is theft from the state, and it is theft from local communities. And we need to use these kinds of informations much more actively. And UNEP sees itself, in a sense, as a knowledge bank that often draws upon, in this case, access to information and data that is available, not just putting it under a new cover, but processing it to a point where it can have a value added with a target group in mind. I just want to pick up on Kenya, because a few weeks ago, as you know, we have a new grand coalition government in Kenya. We managed to convince the Prime Minister and the Minister of Environment to board a 6-seater, 8-seater aircraft in which we mounted a computer screen, and flew both of them over the Mao Forest Complex, which is one of the most important water towers in Kenya. It feeds a large part of the population concentration around Lake Victoria. The microclimate is critical for tea plantations. It feeds virtually every river and lake in its basins. And this Mao Forest Complex is being degraded through legal and illegal logging and settlements at a breathtaking pace. Basically, within 8 to 10 years, this vital ecosystem would disappear. Just by being able to have the interest of the Prime Minister and the Minister to spend 5 hours flying at low altitude with the satellite imagery right in front of them, giving them the intertemporal data and allowing them to understand the pace at what was happening, completely transformed their perception. They knew the area very well, having driven past it, but much of the deforestation is not happening visibly on the edge. It's happening inside, behind the kilometer of, to the outside world, perfectly reasonable forest cover. Flying above it, seeing the sheer scale of destruction has led now to one of the major initiatives to save this ecosystem. And we're doing the same thing in Nairobi. I'm very hopeful that we're about to launch the largest ever and perhaps the most ambitious initiative ever to turn the future of Nairobi around from being another capital city with 4 million people now, essentially degrading a fantastic environmental asset that it has, and being able to show how this is in the interests of people and of the local economy. And again, using satellite imagery, picking out 3 rivers that run through the city as the arteries of restoration around which you can get every neighborhood, thousands of landowners, businesses to become players in this scheme. And the Minister of Environment has convened an interministerial committee on the cabinet, and yet everybody knew what was happening in Nairobi, but it was the ability to show a politically feasible approach, to say, here are 3 rivers. You can't start in a city of 4.5 million people by saying, well, let's do everything. So this is how you create opportunity, political momentum, and I think that's critical. I want to pick up on one more point that Tim mentioned. My dream is precisely that we don't only rely on the satellite imagery, we now start creating what is essentially this extraordinary culture that the internet and the web have provided us. UNEP tried it out with the Billion Tree campaign. Some of you may have heard of this. We simply put out a call on the internet saying, would people be willing to federate their efforts, if you want, by pledging to plant up to 1 billion trees and register their contribution on a website? it was the most extraordinary experience because it was like putting a stick in an ant's nest. I mean, people just from all over the world responded. We're now at 3 billion trees planted, and we've actually set ourselves the goal of having 7 billion trees planted by the time that the next climate COP, not the next, the one in Copenhagen meets, one for every citizen on this planet, without putting money on the table, simply by offering people a vehicle to do something and to get together with others. And this lunchtime I met another person, Amy, what was it, One Change at a Time, Canada, going around to your neighbor and giving them an energy efficient light bulb and saying to them, do you want to do something about it? And apparently like wildfire this initiative is spreading because people feel they can do something. So our power as an institution and as a node in a whole family of institutions is to also create access for people to load their data onto here. So the greatest thing we're hoping for is that a product like this will now, in a sense, create a blog around maybe that lake in Mali with communities or maybe volunteers or development workers, you know, adding their evidence, their data, and creating a conversation around these issues. It won't reach, you know, every pastoralist or nomadic settler in the area, but it may just reach somebody who can then go and talk to them and start a whole different initiative. There is immense power also with the World Wide Web, the internet on the African continent. And I think people have to get over this notion that somehow, you know, people in Africa don't have access to the internet. Not everyone has, certainly not on a scale like here, but more and more people do, and it is a very powerful way of connecting people. I just want to acknowledge one more idea. I think somebody said, you know, what about an atlas about phenomena that influence continents? I think it's a fascinating idea. Can we visually depict what it means to talk about a legacy of carbon emissions or of forest fires? I mean, in Indonesia, it became a major issue of controversy with its neighbors. How do we deal with those issues? Can we document them? Is there a way of triggering a different kind of action as a result of that? So tremendous potential, and I think what we're getting out of the response to this and other atlases is, yes, this is a way to go. It's not just a coffee table book. Thanks.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Achim. Thank you to the whole panel. We've reached the end of our period. As Ashbindu has pointed out, there are all sorts of mechanisms for continuing to stay engaged, and I urge you to be in touch through UNEP's website, through the Wilson Center website, and today's event. It's really, again, it's been a tremendous opportunity for us to host today. We do need to end on time in part because the good news, Achim's on to speak to NPR and some of the other outlets that'll then share these real insights with a broader set of folks here in this country and elsewhere. So please join me in thanking our panel for today's discussion.